Hello, everyone, and welcome to the July edition of the monthly IEEE-USA Washington update. I am Eric Heilman, the Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA here in DC. Another busy month behind us, a busy month in front of us, so let's get right to it. As always, I like to start sort of with the high level, what's going on in Washington, because whether or not the big picture items directly impact the priority and policy issues that we work on, what's happening in the bigger picture tends to impact everything. And this list, I think, really could just have one thing on it. And if you've been watching the news at all, you know what that one thing is. And just to sum it up, I got a newsletter, a political newsletter that I subscribe to, sort of an inside the Beltway piece of journalism. And the top line says, "Happy Thursday morning. There is no oxygen for any topic in Washington except for President Joe Biden's political future." So really all these other things on this list maybe can just come off, because that topic is all anybody is talking about. That said, there are other things happening. Here in DC right now, downtown, a few blocks from here, is a very large NATO summit going on. There are leaders from all over the world here speaking. There are lots of streets being cordoned off. It's a bit of a mess right here. And there's a lot of discussion about what's going on at that particular conference. So here in DC, that's also a big topic of conversation. And as we've talked about previously and will continue, spending bills are starting to move for the upcoming fiscal year, particularly in the House. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. The Senate recently introduced its version of the annual legislation that authorizes the Department of Defense and military programs, the National Defense Authorizations Act, the NDAA. It's about a $900 billion bill that funds and authorizes almost everything that the Department of Defense does. And as we've talked about previously here, tends to be a bipartisan bill, but also moves very slowly and attracts other things on it. There are a lot of issues in there that we will be keeping track of and working, and we'll keep you all posted on. But that action has started in the Senate. And then, of course, the closer we get to November in an election year, everyone is looking towards primaries that are going on still, and the general election in November. And we're getting very close to August, which is the traditional time of year that Congress recesses for a month so that senators and representatives can go back home and work there, do meetings and be with their constituents for a month. So that's kind of where we are in DC right now. And let's get into some of the specifics. I mentioned, obviously, the fiscal year 2025 spending issue, and that continues to be one of the biggest priority issues that we've been working on, largely because the last spending bill, if you recall, that finally came together after threats of government shutdown, after threats, had pretty significant cuts in some of the federal agencies that we support and that we work with. And so we're very keen to make sure that at least some of those cuts are restored as this new process for fiscal year 2025 starts. The fiscal calendar for the federal government goes from October to October. So the end of FY24 will be the end of September of this year, and then we will roll into FY 2025 on October 1. Technically, that means that Congress and the president are supposed to come to an agreement on a 2025 budget by that date. That almost never happens now, and we end up with potential government shutdown threats, as we have in the last several months, or at least with the last process. It's possible we may end up there again this time around, but we don't know, and we need to continue working the process as best we can, especially on those priority items. The House is moving first, as it traditionally does with these bills, with these spending bills, and are likely to finish passing all of the different bills that make up the budget through the House by the end of this month. The Senate is much further behind. And just to go into a little bit more detail, the process is pretty complicated, pretty convoluted, and even within a lot of these boxes and arrows, there are sort of little sub boxes and arrows that you could do and could draw. But this is a pretty good outline of kind of how things work or are supposed to work every year as the federal budget is proposed and then goes through the process of congressional review and approval. That box right now where the arrow is pointed is where we are right now. As I said, the House has begun processing various pieces of legislation that together combined make up the budget, the federal government budget. Most of the agencies that we are supportive of and care about, NIST, NSF, NASA, are all within one of 12 bills that's called the Commerce Justice Science Bill. We call it CJS. That bill has now passed out of the committee in the House, the Appropriations Committee, and will go to the floor. And the numbers for those agencies are not great. There is cause for concern, but there's not cause for alarm yet, because at the end of the day, when we get down to the conference committee, which is sort of the box right below the red box, that's where a lot of the tough negotiations start happening between the two, the House and the Senate. And there's opportunities to kind of get some of those numbers up at that point. And we're going to be working at all stages to make sure that some of these really devastating and difficult cuts that a lot of the leaders of these agencies have lamented and gone to Congress to kind of try and fix, that they are restored and at least pointed back in the right direction. Like I said, I don't know where there will be any final resolution on these numbers until the end of this year at the very earliest. Because this is an election year, however, the dynamics are very, very different. Usually when Congress comes back after an election and tries to finish up whatever work is done before the end of the year and before they start a whole new Congress at the beginning of the year, largely with new leadership, maybe a new president, a whole new slate. So things are going to be pretty dicey for the next few months. And so to that end, as I've mentioned before, we have put out an action alert. Where we are requesting that IEEE members and interested parties go to our website, fill out a few pieces of information to auto-populate a letter that can be emailed to your representative. You can tweak the letter a little bit if you want, but we have put in there specific requests to support NSF and NIST funding as this process unfolds. So far, we've gotten about 1,000 emails sent to 200 or so different Hill offices, which is a great number. We'd love to keep that going. So there should be a link in the presentation here where you can go on our website to fill out this form, make some edits if you'd like, click send, and that message will be delivered to your member of Congress and your 2 senators. So we encourage you to do that. We'd love to kind of keep this number going higher and higher and begin to get a little bit of traction on that. At the end of the day, this really helps members of Congress, their staffs, their offices know who you are, who we are, and what we care about. It's just one tool in the arsenal that we have in terms of advocacy and lobbying. So we encourage you to go find this site and fill out a couple of bits of information and have your voice be heard. Another positive development happened this week. This notice of meeting goes around to members of a particular committee in the House of Representatives. And this time, this is a note that went to the Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over tax, trade, and healthcare matters. And the notice really was to inform members of the committee that they are going to consider pieces of legislation officially for a markup. They are going to discuss it, vote on it, and vote it up or down out of the committee to move on to the next process. One of those bills is one that we have supported in the past. We are endorsing this time around the Education and Workforce Freedom Act, which essentially expands those 529 college savings plans that if you have kids, hopefully you're investing in those, to include some of the things that are important to our members and important to a lot of the academic and institutional areas that our members work in. So licenses and professional certifications will be a part of that. So that was a very positive development. Anytime we can get a piece of legislation that we support and endorse to start moving through the formal process, that's a good sign. So we have already signed on to a coalition and to letters supporting this effort, and we'll be tracking the development of this from here. Moving out of committee is a positive step, never a guarantee to passage and into law, but you can't have law without it going through this process typically. So another good development. Another big action item that occurred this week, just a couple days ago, actually, the House Science Committee introduced and then went through a markup and passed within a 2-day period a comprehensive piece of legislation to reauthorize NASA. Congress has tried this effort a few times in the past and has not quite succeeded. It's been 7 years since NASA has been formally reauthorized. And to kind of remind you, or to sort of give you a little bit of context, reauthorization bills aren't always needed for an agency to do its work, but they are very helpful. They can give congressional directive, congressional approval for certain programs or spending levels that are already happening, and really sort of provide support for an agency to do the work that it's doing. In this case, you're looking at about over $25 billion in funding that's authorized for NASA for FY25. And it addresses a wide range of programs and policies, essentially, that NASA is already doing. And some of the top items are listed here. Additional manned space travel and moon landing is very high on NASA's agenda. And this is sort of Congress's way of saying, we support you doing this. Please look at this. Maybe you should do a study on that. If you need additional funding for this, please come to Congress at this time. It's that sort of a bill. And like I said, it passed out of the House Science Committee yesterday, and we'll be tracking that as well and weighing in wherever necessary, but another positive development. And I put this in here. We don't often talk about export controls or technology transfer issues, or really a lot much in the international space. But this was one that I thought was interesting enough to kind of make folks aware and point you towards additional information if you wanted it. The Treasury Department put out what's called an ANPRM, an Advance Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. Essentially, it's their announcement of saying, we intend to put out new regulations, new federal guidance on X, Y, and Z. And if you want to comment, please do by this date. And this really involves the transfer of technologies and AI quantum chips manufacturing to countries of concern. And by countries of concern, they mean China. This is obviously part of the ongoing government effort to ensure that U.S. competitiveness is not undermined by what is seen as a lot of nefarious actions by Chinese companies and the Chinese government in a lot of the technology space. So this is an interesting enough development that I wanted to make everybody aware of it. It's not entirely unique, though. There's been a lot of related proposals and regulations going back to the Trump administration, specifically using these types of executive tools to tamp down and to sort of decouple some of the technology supply chain, global supply chains, particularly when it comes to countries like China. There should be a link in the comments section for more information, directing you to the Treasury Department's website, and comments are due by the 4th in case anyone is interested. One thing I wanted to do here is start previewing the election and how it might impact IEEE-USA and the policies and issues that we advocate. And one way to do this was to look through the lens of one particular committee and the senators that make up that committee and their election likelihood, their election outlook. And I picked the Senate Commerce Committee because it's probably one of the most important committees in the Senate for the policy issues that we work on, that many of you work in, do research on. Its full title is actually, it has science. The committee's title has science in the title, but we always shorten it to Senate Commerce Committee. And what's interesting is that a number of the senators who are on this committee are up for re-election. Now, if you remember, U.S. senators serve 6-year terms, and since there's 100 of them, only 2/3 of the Senate, 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election every election cycle. So not everybody on the committee is up for re-election again, but a good handful are. And of those who are, about a quarter are in what are called toss-up seats. And the Senate seats the Senate races are really ones that political watchers and lobbyists and those of us that do policy really hone in on, because with only 100 seats, one or two of those seats flipping or changing can completely change the balance of power, not just in the Senate, but in Washington. And so there's always a small handful of seats of senators who are sort of in limbo in terms of whether or not they're going to get reelected. This comes from Real Clear Politics, which is a source that a lot of folks use to kind of keep tabs on polling data. So they kind of gauge a lot of other sources to come up with these determinations. But because there's such a large number, A, of this committee, A, up for reelection, and B, in toss-up seats, the outcome of this election really could sway not just the makeup of this committee, but therefore the policy issues and the direction those policy issues take, the ones that we care about, obviously. So we're watching this very, very closely. Some of you may live in some of these states, and maybe you're not seeing some of the same numbers that's reflected here. Polling is absolutely not the exact science that I think we all wish it would be. But it's just sort of an interesting way to track the upcoming election with a particular tie to tech policy, to R&D spending, to AI, to space policy, the types of things that this committee works on, that this committee has oversight on, and that we care about and work on as well. Another, going back to agency action, as you know, the Commerce Department's NIST, which oversees and manages the CHIPS office, which is essentially promulgating the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 and managing most of the programs that were contained in that legislation. There's a new announcement out of NIST and out of the CHIPS office of up to $1.6 billion across 5 different research areas. And this, I think, is something that I know the Commerce Department is eager to get out and to promote. We always like to try and help them with that. We have always been a big supporter, as you know, of the CHIPS and Science legislation itself from almost 2.5 years ago now, but also the federal government's programming around that, and of course funding, which we talk about all the time. But this was an interesting development and announcement. They often come out with some of these announcements, but this one was particularly interesting and potentially impactful to a number of IEEE members in the United States that I thought it was worth sharing. And again, there should be a link in the comment section to learn a lot more about this. As with all federal government funding opportunities, there are going to be hoops you have to jump through and strings attached. But I'm hopeful that this could be a benefit to somebody out there within our membership and within the broader domestic tech industry. So that's it for the policy updates. This is a good transition into some of the programming and events that we have upcoming. Some may remember that last year we did a chip-specific event on pre-silica chip development. We did that in San Diego. Now we're coming down the supply chain a little bit in Arizona to do a chips packaging event in October. There should be more information on our website about that, but this is another great event where we are trying to promote and explain and provide networking and information gathering opportunities about the CHIPS and Science Act, the semiconductor industry, the federal government focus and investment on the supply chain and related industries. And we announced our next iWork conference. This is the Innovation, Workforce, and Research Conference series that we have started. The first one, if you recall, was in Little Rock, Arkansas. We just had our second one in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And we have announced our third one for the beginning of December this year in Huntsville, Alabama. And what makes this one unique is that it is specific to the aerospace and defense industry. We were very excited to be down in Huntsville, to be down in Region 3, and to bring together academics, the business community, government, think tank folks, influencers in the aerospace and defense world to collaborate and talk about opportunities to grow some of the industries, the related industries in that region and beyond. So this is a great event. We're diligently looking to pull together a really good program, and we're very excited to have our third iWork conference coming up soon. So that's all I have. Hopefully, if you have questions, you've remembered them and you can pop them into the chat. As always, I can be found on my email address or by phone, which is listed right here. I will give a minute or two for folks to drop something in the chat if they have a question or just a comment. We moved a little quickly here, but I think we covered a lot of information, and whatever I missed, obviously you can come find me other ways to check in on. We're going to have our next update a month from now on the 8th, same time. So I don't know that that's going to be a pretty heavy agenda. Usually by the time we hit August, things start slowing down quite a bit here in Washington, but I'm sure there's enough that I can pull together and that I can put on a screen for you to digest and think about, and to be informative. And I might end up doing a lot more on some election bits, because I think things are going to pick up quite a bit in the next several weeks and months moving forward. So, not seeing any questions. Again, email or call me if you have any, if you think of any later, or if you weren't able to get it in this session. And thanks as always for tuning in, and we will talk to you again in a month. Take care.